Greetings and welcome to the Transfer Flow podcast. I'm your part-time host, Ted Knudsen. I am joined by your other part-time host, Patrick Van Straten. And today we are going to talk about the most interesting things in the transfer rumor, flow, model. This includes Conor Gallagher, includes Teun Koopmeiners, Jake O'Brien, also goes by Jack and John, as we covered in an earlier recording, sell-on clauses in the industry, and also the world's best footballer has bought his own football team. And we'll talk about whatever else we feel like in the time. Welcome aboard, Patrick.
Thank you for having me, Ted. It's good to see you again. How are you doing?
I'm good. So I was sick earlier in the week, and Ravi had to cover for me. And then I'm out here in California, so I'm up at a crazy hour in order to record podcasts with you. Goodness of my own heart.
Yeah. What a treat for you both, because Rishi, our producer, is up at the crack of dawn as well, and it's just so that you can see me sitting in my loft, sweating.
Yeah.
Great time.
For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we can be found with a daily free newsletter at thetransferflow.com/subscribe. The newsletter has different information and a lot of analysis, sometimes some snark, sometimes a lot of fun, really, inside of that. So please join us there. And then for those of you who are coming back again, whether you're on YouTube, podcasts, or otherwise, welcome back. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, I've been enjoying the newsletter, actually. I've been getting educated by it because I feel like it's one of those things where your knowledge of this is pretty different for you. But I went through a period where I knew a lot. Then I went through a period where I knew nothing because I just had a baby, and it's been kind of a roller coaster up and down since. So it's been nice to get back into the swing of things, thanks to your writing and Kim's as well.
I'm kind of back now. There were about 2 years where I was full-time American football. So just egg ball all the time. There was a period where I was actually surrounded by giant American football players while we were doing research. So that was fun. But no, it's nice to actually be catching up and to talk to my football friends again. Because there's a point at which they only want to talk about football. And if you don't have that information, you're like, yeah, you want to talk about babies? You want to talk about, Tua? I don't know. So yeah, anyway, welcome back.
Yeah, well, it's we've got some interesting stories, I think. I mean, the Mbappe one is a different kind of thing, but the Gallagher one is intriguing, I think, because on the face of it, Conor Gallagher, Atletico Madrid, that does seem like a natural kind of stylistic matchup. It's just funny to imagine Conor Gallagher in Madrid. I don't know. Does this seem as obvious to you as it does to me in lots of ways?
It's a funny one because I think Kim flagged it up early in the window. I flagged it up as coming back. And I kind of wonder, is he offended? Is he irritated by what Chelsea has done, potentially putting him on the market or not putting him on the market? He's like, look, I'm an England international. I'm pretty fucking good.
Yeah.
Why are we dealing with this?
Well, and last season, he was kind of one of the few people who emerged from the campaign with any sort of honor. It was certainly felt among Chelsea fans that he was one of, I mean, I know all the stuff of playing for the shirt or whatever is pretty hard to tell, but Chelsea fans certainly, he certainly felt that he was one of the few people who seemed like he gave a shit down the stretch. And it did feel like the midfield was more coherent, harder to play against when Gallagher was on the field. And now they've ejected him so they could buy somebody in for, it seems to be the prices in the end are going to be pretty similar. They're not, I know that you can register this one as pure profit, but Dewsbury Hall is a different sort of player, but is he?
Yeah, totally.
Is he
he's creative midfielder, passer, not going to do the destructive work. I think we've been talking inside the Slack, in the TTF Slack. We felt that this was such a good Simeone fit. And clearly they sort of feel that way too. And then also him having a chip on his shoulder and being offended is also a Simeone fit. So I don't know. It's hard for me not to get a little bit excited about this, about a Chelsea player going to Atletico Madrid, which I have no interest in whatsoever, outside of the transfer element. And also how's he going to play in Spain?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that team has been built on intelligent workhorses. That Simeone side over the last decade, and it's gone through quite a few iterations. I always think that it's quite a good rubric for working out who knows what they're talking about among English punditry as to how they talk about Atletico Madrid, because there are people still talking about them this season the way that Rio Ferdinand still talks about Italian sides, where he's obviously They sit deep. They love to defend. It's like, have you watched Serie A recently? Serie A is the most
High scoring
cocaine-y
league
league I've
outside
ever
of last
seen.
year.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
stylistically diverse and weird and aggressive, and it's great fun to watch. And I wouldn't say the same for Atletico Madrid, but they certainly are not the we will bunker and destroy you on the break kind of side that they used to be. They have tried to develop into something else, and actually last season probably to their detriment, because they might have had a run at the Champions League final had they maybe been more like the Atleti of old.
It's such a tough choice from a tactical perspective. Like
Hmm.
coaches, the smartest coaches will adapt. They'll adapt
Yeah.
and add new wrinkles to their game, but they also have to adapt to their personnel at the same time. So it's hard. But for someone like Simeone, who's been in the job forever, like he's one of the longest tenured managers in Europe, right? If
Yeah.
not the longest.
Hmm.
He's had great success with a particular style, which is like it works really well in the Champions League. But it very rarely gets them in the conversation with the league. How do you balance that? Create a little more flavor in the league, but then keep that Champions League rock solid defensiveness? That's an open question. Anyway, Conor Gallagher fits great in this. Either way.
He's not. I think we all kind of agree that he's not like the world's greatest passer. He's okay. He's better than I thought he was going to be during that period at Palace where everyone was like, this guy's unbelievable. And I was like, can this guy pass 10 yards? Like, that is something we need to see from him yet. Because right then he was like, he will press you to death, and then he will get in the box and get shots. And he's shown he can do a bit more than that. He can look like he belongs in this team, which was, I guess, on the fringes of European football towards the end of the campaign. Very mobile, huge defensive action numbers for the kind of player he is, or big defensive action numbers for the kind of player he is, and still 12 goal involvements last season, which is pretty tasty. So I've never been the biggest Llorente fan at Atletico Madrid. He had that one season where everything he hit went in, which was kind of funny. But you can certainly see Gallagher plugging into that role. Llorente is 29 now and has been rumoured for a move to Saudi for a while. And Atleti don't need him to be this incredible, incisive passer. They just need him to be like decent to excellent at all the other stuff. And he is, I'd say, decent to excellent at all the other
And
stuff.
to play a lot. Somebody that's not injured actually has a lot of value if you have a lot of campaign stuff going on. Gallagher seems like he's going to be able to be a pretty solid workhorse for them. So yeah, we're positive about it. Fee looks about 40 million euros. I suspect there's probably a sell-on clause inside of that if they're negotiating well, because they're worried that maybe he goes to somewhere bigger or he comes back. And like,
Sure.
Manchester United apparently need people in their midfield. This could be a 2-year long. He goes and lives in a little bit warm climate, comes back, plays there. Who knows? But yeah, it's a good deal outside of the UK, and it makes sense for them to fill the need.
Yeah, I mean, that does seem to be one of their chief concerns. Like, maybe it's because of the kind of PR problem that Chelsea had over the last 10 years with players they lost who went on to great success elsewhere. So maybe that's something that the relatively new owners are fearful of. But it seems as well like they've taken significantly less money to sell him outside of the league, because Villa were interested, Spurs were interested. £33 million, 40 million euros is like not that much for a 24-year-old international.
No.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay.
I'm happy.
Let's go to a different type of midfielder.
Okay.
Please, walk us through.
We're going to talk about Teun Koopmeiners. Yeah. I love this guy. I think everyone loves this guy. I mean, if we're going to talk about Conor Gallagher's appearances in the TTF Slack, then Teun has been tearing it up, because he's 26 years old. He's been at Atalanta for a couple of years now, moved there from AZ in the Netherlands, had come through. I think he came through AZ's academy, and he has played a bunch of different roles. Like in the Netherlands, he was playing a deeper role. His passing was, I suppose, more progressive. Like there was more of a defensive element to this game. This last season, probably his most attacking yet. 15 non-penalty goals and assists in the league. And you can see him moving forward, because I remember a season in the Netherlands where his average shot distance was over 30 yards out. And now it's edge of the area. And expected assists up, still passing into the penalty area quite a bit. I mean, he's just like a good all-round midfielder with a nice touch, pretty two-footed, good shot. Like, there's a lot to like, and Juventus apparently want him for about 45 mil, which makes sense.
So when we were doing the analysis on him, everybody knew about him in the smart teams. And AZ were one of those very smart teams as well. For those of you who don't know, AZ was run by a former American baseball player. Former Dutch baseball player who played in the U.S.
Okay.
It's tricky. And he was friends with Billy Beane. And in fact, Billy Beane's first position in the football space was actually as an advisor to the AZ Alkmaar board of directors. So there was a lot of connectivity there. And AZ spent a lot of time building a very good academy. Then they ended up with better recruitment than most places as well. There's been a pipeline of players that have played there that have gone on to other places with varying degrees of success. Koopmeiners might have been one of the most exciting ones that they had, partly because he's a different type of midfielder. Like when he was there at AZ, he was much more destructive. Like he could do all the things, but his ability to destroy things looked a little more like Gallagher. He wasn't getting a lot of interceptions like a full deep lying playmaker, but he would destroy things, and then he would move the ball forward. He would have good passing. At Atlanta over the last 2 years, especially.
Yeah, since going to Atalanta, he has been slowly moved forward. Defensive actions slowly creeping down. Expected assists have been pretty high the whole time there, passing into the penalty area more and more, shooting more and more. And he seems to have adapted really nicely to that role. I mean, obviously you lose some stuff. So he used to be a kind of useful aerial asset as a midfielder, but the further he's got forward, he's competing aerially with centre backs, and it's less useful. But when you're playing maybe some little guys, you want him in there. I don't know. It's interesting. I think there's an interesting comparison point, his use last season to the way that we're seeing Mikel Merino be shopped around, because that was a guy who kind of came through playing much deeper, much more destructive role. And now he's in that forward role, edge of the box. He's still doing loads and loads of duels, but is expected to have a little bit more influence in the final third, despite not being the most nimble kind of player. So yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, the one question I guess I'd have is the question I always kind of have about Atalanta, which is, does Gasperini juice these attackers' numbers? It's a little bit like when Nagelsmann was at Hoffenheim, and you would see like, Ishak Belfodil got 15 goals in the league this season. Is that a guy we should sign? Like, no.
No.
So I guess there's that question. But with Koopmeiners, you're definitely getting a very useful player who can perform a bunch of roles, is intelligent, is a good age. Price doesn't seem crazy. Wages probably aren't crazy either.
Oh, no. So I hate this price.
Really?
And I hate it for Juve.
What is it, 45 mil euros?
Yeah, exactly. It's 45 million.
Okay.
He's on. So if you have a normal league, so if we take away the Italian aging effect, which seems to be its own special thing, that price is too high for Juve to be paying these days. Like they need to be shopping 10 million less than that for the most part. Like they still don't have a magic money tree. They do have the only great stadium in Italy. But the problem for them is like they've never fully taken their medicine. And so if I were running Juventus, which I'm not, and in fact, I'm happy to root against Juventus, but for that price inside of Italy, I think it needs to be kind of 10 million less than that. And some people are like, oh, it's only 10 million. Man, 10 millions in Italy is another attacker that you're getting from Serbia or Croatia or whatever that you're going to be able to sell on to the Premier League or the Spain or whatever. So yeah, I would be a little cautious about that price. I like Koopmeiners just fine. If a UK team were paying 45, I'd be kind of on the fence about that. For Juve is like too much.
But I think that's what the Juve specific effect, I understand, but it does kind of feel like it would be a little bit of a failure if Atalanta only had one bidder for this player. You know, obviously Liverpool, you kind of expect to be in the mix just because they need a midfielder. This is a guy who can do a bunch of midfield stuff, and he played under Arne Slot, and so inevitably we therefore have to link him to Liverpool. Is the player he is now right for what Liverpool need? No, not really.
No. So let's talk about that actually.
Okay.
Right now, he breaks the Liverpool model of recruitment, right? The only way that they recruit these days, and I think this is probably right for them, is they will recruit future stars in the kind of 20 to 24 range. or they will recruit post-peak elites at the 27, 28 to 30 range. Like they'll even go up if they found a value, right? What they don't want to do is pay for like a 26-year-old that's probably on the post-peak, but they want to pay, somebody wants you to pay full price. Also, I don't think, unless that midfield is completely changed, unless that role has completely changed inside of slot system, like he doesn't fit there. The old version of him might have, because they needed him to be destructive and like very, very forward looking in his defense and then also moving the ball forward. Nowadays, there's a question as to the role he currently plays is not what they need ever. Like they're not looking for like an attacking creative 10. Yeah, I don't see it.
Okay. Is there anyone that you do think would have a natural home for this player, or is this a situation where Juve can afford to wait, let the price come down?
I think your comment on Gasperini is correct. I think the world's starting to clue into that a little bit. And then I think that the price has to be better for them at the moment. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe somebody jumps in. We like the player. So that's the weird part. It's just it's a bit like Xerxes. You could see what people would see about him, and you could see a little bit of stuff in the stats. But if he's not a perfect fit, then that incorporates risk inside of it. And then you're like, ooh, I don't know. Got to bring the price down.
Do you not? Have you noticed that this has become an incredibly Dutch summer? I feel like half the players we've covered have been Dutch, and most of them we've been criticizing, to be honest. But they're good ones.
You're not Nikos, and you're not Dutch, but you guys both have like connectivity into that. Nikos felt like this Dutch Euros team was one of the most talented they've ever had. And the problem with the Dutch is usually the coach. Like the coach kind of coaches to the level of talent. They've had few generational great coaches recently. They have one that's in Manchester right now that is struggling with that particular squad. But before then, he was really, really good. Because of that, like there are a lot of good reasons to feel positive about Dutch football and Dutch players in general. But the sticking point, I think, this summer is like connecting the dots to places they can succeed. And that's part of your whole job in recruitment. Like you have to find players that are not only good at skills, but they have to succeed where we are or wherever they're going. And I think that the absence of knowledge about exactly how some of these new coaches will fit in, or where they're at in their career, or the fact that they've changed roles, means that there's more uncertainty around these players than there has been in recent time.
I think that the failure to produce coaches is like absolutely incomprehensible. Like they go back to the same well a bunch of times. The last three managers, I think, of the Netherlands had all been managers of the Netherlands before they were sacked. And I'm just kind of waiting until the day I wake up, because I have always supported the Netherlands as a national team. One day I'm just going to wake up and it's going to be, Peter Bos as the Netherlands manager, and I'm going to have to change my surname.
Yeah, really? That negative on Peter Bosz?
I just can't. I can't get into it. He's not significant enough for me to spend my time on. Shall we move on to somebody else whose name we have learned? Is that right?
John Jake Jingleheimer Schmidt O'Brien.
Exactly. Yeah. You can say that. Somebody with my accent should not be saying that. Okay. Jake O'Brien, who's now completed his move to Everton from Lyon. 23 years old, 6'6", big unit, seems dicey.
Is that a description we're allowed to use? Is this like PG-13, or are we like full into the R ratings?
All right, come on. He is an absolutely colossal guy. He's Irish, which feels kind of dice. Before last season, had 50 appearances between League Two and the Belgian second tier. So this is like one season production, and people love to buy a centre back out of Ligue 1 after one big season. How do you feel about this? Because I was watching him, and he's got pretty good set piece danger for a centre back. And I thought, I wonder how Ted feels about this guy.
Yeah, man mountain there. There were a couple of guys that existed in the championship that were just massive, and you could plunk them into any good set piece team. And you're looking at an extra 5 to 10 goals a year. Like that was how big they were, especially if you have multiple targets. So I'm confident about his physical abilities.
Sure.
The rest of it is slightly unknown. Lyon historically have been quite good at the recruitment side of things, and they're good at the value. This is another good value moment. And it definitely feels like he fits in with Sean Dyche's system. Like, give me some dude that's going to be great physically, that can kick the ball a million miles up the pitch when necessary on a clearance, and can be good on the end of set pieces. Like, that's an accurate fit of most of his center backs over time. I think Tarkowski actually had quite a bit more skill than most of the guys that we fit in with Dyche.
Yeah.
But also, Dyche gets a shop at a different market these days, about higher up, so they're better.
And this is 17 mil for a guy who comes in with, obviously zero language difficulties. I don't know. Maybe I don't think he was at Palace long enough to count as homegrown. But he's a stay-at-home centre back who is like not a particularly incisive passer, but is not going to do dumb shit on the ball. Like, he plays passes he knows he can complete. Again, I can see Sean Dyche looking at this and being like, "This is my guy."
Don't give me any idiots. They're gonna screw things up.
Yeah,
and also like guys that learn well, right? I think Dyche actually needs guys that are a little bit clever. Like, you can't have just pure lunkheads in the back line.
Yeah. So I mean, for this price, it feels good. Everton's recruitment for the next few years needs to be turn the squad over quite a bit without spending very much money, and don't get relegated. And also don't get ideas above your station. Because in the past, Everton every few years would decide that they were going to be like AC Milan.
So mean. To be fair, they even brought in the manager of AC Milan. So,
well, that word, yeah. I'm a big fan of Everton, but I just feel like they got sold dreams again and again and again, and it was always the way to be ambitious is to keep Ross Barkley, John Stones. It's to tell the fans we're going to finish fourth, and Everton are now in a situation where you do kind of worry for the future of the club. So £17 million centre backs, fine.
Nobody rolls the compounding correctly. So look at what Brighton have done most recently. I think Brighton's the best example of this now. They take good players that are undervalued from different places in the world. They continue to develop them. They put them in the Premier League where everyone's comfortable that they're really good now. And then they sell them on for 2, 3, 4, 5x what they bought them for. And they don't replace that with somebody that costs, 4 times what that guy costs. They do the same thing over and over and over again. That is the patient compounding. That is the only way that you really build value inside of a club with the recruitment space. What so often happens is you spike 1 or 2, then you have a bigger budget, you buy much more expensive players. But I think part of that is because they don't trust the recruitment process that got them there before. And so now they're like, oh, we need to win now. And so nobody has these long-term visions. If you don't have long-term vision, you can't build sort of franchise value, is what we call it in the US. And then, you see the ups and downs happen multiple times.
Does there come a point, or rather, how do you tell when the point has come where you do go for it? Because Brighton will get opportunities, right? Where they can say, other teams are in a bit of a mess. We've got a particularly good crop of youngsters. We go for it.
Head coach is the lever. If you don't have a great head coach alongside of really talented players, which is the hardest thing that these teams seem to do over and over again, like, that's your failure. So you have to lock in a head coach for maybe 2 additional years or something like that. Somebody is good, that works inside of the system, that then can go through and coach your players. The system's there, and that aggregates as well. When you chop and change systems all the time, like, you also lose efficiency in building a team. But the one thing that none of these teams can keep outside of the very, very best, very, very funded, is their good head coaches. Because if you have a great head coach, somebody else is going to bid a ton of money, and they're going to drag their heads over here. Like, hey, you can make 5 times the salary. Everybody's going to move for 5 times the salary back. It's just, yeah. So that's, I think, the toughest bit of team building and franchise building.
Yeah, well, hopefully Everton can roll a few of these signings into just like a sustainable Premier League squad. Because, I mean, when you look at a club like Palace, there was a period where every single season with Palace, I was like, maybe this is the year relegation comes for them. And if relegation comes for them, they're in so much trouble. Because they had a bunch of old British guys on crazy, crazy wages. And it was really, really concerning as to like what they were going to do. Was their value would just crater if they went down. And then they went and got a few good signings and just have turned the squad over really impressively, I think.
They dodged their bullet, and Hodgson helped them do it because
Hmm.
he was able to eke out enough defensive ability out of that squad. Well, it took them 3 years to churn it and make it younger and better. I
Yeah.
think Fulham have that danger right now. And Marco
Yes.
Silva's pretty good, but they were one of the oldest squads in the league last year. They need to get much younger. Maybe Scott McTominay will solve that for them.
Yeah. Scott McTominay and Emile Smith Rowe. It's going to do it. That we'll see. I
That's a
don't know.
really interesting midfield, actually.
Yeah, I'm kind of intrigued to see, because also like they stayed up with Andres Pereira in midfield, and I can't stand that guy. I don't know if it's going to work out, but that does feel like, you know, Emile Smith Rowe is a lot of money for that kind of player with that kind of injury record, and that does feel like we're going to go and get the star player who's going to make things work for us, rather than maybe we need to spread this cost around and just get younger. Because I agree. I was looking the other day at the kind of oldest lineups fielded in the Premier League last year, and out of like the 20 oldest lineups, something like 16 of them were Fulham lineups. It's really
I
concerning.
had a chance to watch Fulham end of season against Glasner's Palace.
Mm-hmm.
And the first half was completely dominated by Crystal Palace. Then, not so good second half. It was a good goal from Fulham. They managed to withstand a lot of the problems. But I also did all the research before I went and watched them. I was like, ooh, this is like in the Premier League, this is all often a moment where we see a club ratchet down because it's so expensive to rebuild for the younger guys. And even more so now than it's ever been. So I think Fulham have like a big job. Maybe Smith Rowe was the best thing they could do. And a lot of times in recruitment, that's what you're choosing. What is the best, not bad option we can do? Because all the good options are taken by other places. We tried. Maybe we get one out of 25 that you were in for. And then, yeah, you're like, okay, everybody else that we've got on the list, we're not excited by, but we need players, and we need players that are better than we have. And hopefully next year we'll get better. And maybe we'll get lucky and one of these guys will be a lot better than what we thought.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll see what happens with them. I mean, they got their big Palhinha payout, so I guess they've got cash.
I that was one of the weirdest deals of the summer. I don't understand the monetary elements behind that one. Well, good luck to them. Maybe eventually you're like, oh, that was a huge agent deal here, and like a great commission, and the agent got like a third of the fee or something like that. You're like, all right, well, that makes more sense. Somebody got paid. Lots of people got paid.
I just don't think I'm going to get over Vincent Kompany coaching Bayern Munich with Joao Palhinha in midfield. It's never going to compute for me. We have some stuff on the business of football. Should we talk a little bit about that? Because
yeah, so
I know you want to.
Also, if you guys are listening and things are a little bit more noisy, know that I'm on my holiday, and so I'm in the holiday house. And there's kids all over the place, and it was this or not pod. So if you're going to complain in the comments, just realize that I'm only here because of the sacrifice and beautiful quality. So we got a request to talk about sell-on clauses, and in particular, like the sell-on clauses for the Calafiori fee. How do they impact the industry? Like, what are you thinking when these things are happening, right? And mostly sell-on clauses are a device that either it's getting you a player that you couldn't get otherwise, because the team that has them would happily take the money, but they don't want to lose the future value, right? So effectively, you've got a player that you think might be worth 40 million. Somebody comes in for 25 million. He wants to move. You're like, we're okay with it. We don't mind a pathway there. We actually think he's really good. So we want a significant fee above and beyond that to be able to realize some of that future value. That's the only way we're going to let that player go. It happens a lot with academy players or young players. You're like, hey, this player's pretty good. We just want to have a little bit of upside value. And so the way the upside value works is, say you paid 10 million for a player. That player is then sold for 20 million, and you had a 50% sell-on clause. Well, the 10 million has to be repaid first. And then you get the amount above and beyond. So in some cases, you'll get additional 5, some cases additional 1. Sometimes there's clauses above and beyond that stay involved. One of the weirdest ones I saw was Getafe had a clause from taking Mason Greenwood on loan last year.
Yeah.
So they apparently got a payout from that Marseille deal, which was quite unusual, but makes sense. You're like buying in the player development from here and here and saying, we'll take him on loan, but we want like 5% of his future transfer value for some reason. And Mason Greenwood, particularly complicated circumstance. The Calafiori deal in particular, though, I feel like, yes, Basel were okay letting him go to Bologna. Maybe he wanted to go back to Italy, or that was just a better path for him to find his next move. But they knew that he was good. And so they wanted to have a significant clause. Sometimes you negotiate the base fee way, way down for a higher clause, or it's pure championship football manager stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So like, hey, this is the only way we're going to get this deal done. We've got a 20% clause on this. It's the best thing we could do. Hopefully this guy's great. And we know that our future return on selling this guy is not going to be as good as it would be otherwise. That's the best you can do in those situations.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any circumstances where you've seen things where you're like, that's either weird or that's actually a really clever deal? What do you think?
Do I have any that I think are clever? Honestly, not off the top of my head. Like, this is the kind of stuff that I've completely memory hold. What have you got? Is there something that comes to mind for you?
I think there's a variety of ones. I think Chelsea kind of screwed up some stuff back when they had that great era of players that they had recruited externally, and then Mourinho just canned all of them.
Yeah.
And they were so good that in many cases, you're like, if they'd kept a 25% sell-on clause, they would have been really happy in letting those guys go. But I think they were all right with their fees. Like Chelsea had a different model then. A lot of what happens now is you get tribunals from the academy players. So when young players move, they come out there, and if they came out of contract, then you would have to go to a tribunal and there'd be a fee agreed, and it's like a weird situation. So if you've got an academy player that you're selling on that you fully develop, say it comes from the Manchester City Academy or something,
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, we'll sell this player, but we just want 20% of the future upside of value of anything, or 40%, or like whatever it is. That is a way to keep, I guess, an option on future player value that doesn't necessarily impede that player's movement directly.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that most teams are happy to sweep under the rug and say, yeah, all right, we'll deal with that. It's a future problem. Like how many future problems does current Patrick create for himself? Like probably a lot, you know. Maybe future Patrick's really, really grateful for the nice things you do, but for a lot of these teams, they're like, I'm only here for 18 months. That's a 3-year problem. I'm out of here.
Mm-hmm. And in Bologna's case as well, you know, these gambles got them into the Champions League. So
paid a lot of money on the Champions League, gives them a lot of money to reload for the future. They lost their coach to Juventus, but this was like unexpectedly great season for them, so they can't complain at all.
Mm-hmm. And you can develop a reputation, presumably, as a team that gets guys moves. How much do you know that factors into players' decisions?
It factors a lot. Part of it is around kind of I see this in like an oil metaphor, like the lack of viscosity from agents being able to move their players through a place. They're like, look, we have a good relationship with the people here. We know that it's a good stage. If we bring them on loan, or sorry, not on loan, but on a transfer that has a significant fee attached to it, then maybe we've got a good shop window. 2 years from now, you've got the best opportunity to move to a big club, something like that. The flip side of it is the Raiola pattern, where he took Haaland.
Mm-hmm.
He knew ahead of time that he was going to have like 2 or 3 moves. And part of that was that Raiola wanted the fees, right? So he's pre-booking both performance and moves. You can have Haaland for 2 years. Then we're going to move here. The maximum fee you're going to get paid is this. I'm going to get paid this commission. That is allegedly sort of what happened.
Okay.
And he did that twice. And if you have a young player with a big agent, you will often see them make an earlier move that is unexpected. They don't just go to Manchester United, because there's a bigger payout by them going to a different club than having another big transfer fee attached in the meantime. So you get a middleman element. Dortmund acted that way a few times over the last decade. And obviously they had big benefits. And they got the players, and it was unexpectedly great that they had these young players. They became a pipeline for young players, so you were comfortable sending your players there. But the flip side of it is they never quite seemed to recoup as big a transfer fee as you might have expected at the time. On the flip side, they got things like Ousmane Dembele for like a massive fee. So they've done all right for themselves.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It now seems as well that we're getting some clubs understanding the value, or understanding the way that a bad loan can affect a player's value. So we've seen some stuff over the last couple of years that teams are asking this fee as a loan fee, but if the player doesn't play enough, then the loan fee actually goes up. to kind of compensate them for the loss in player development.
That was a German style that we absolutely adored at Brentford.
Mm-hmm.
And we were like, look, we'll give them minutes, especially if they're good, and we'll happily make sure that they get in there. It's a way for a developing team that has good young players but can't play them this year to really incentivize the club to play the players, right?
Mm-hmm.
The minutes is what's needed.
Yeah.
They're loaning this player out so that this player can get minutes in a league that looks like this against this type of competition. One, as we talked about before, like with the Smith Rowe deal or a Reece Nelson deal, the more minutes you get, the more confident the buyer is that they understand what they're getting. And the second bit is the players simply getting minutes is important for their development. They have to be on the pitch in important times. Training is not good enough. U23 games is not good enough. You've got to be out there having real competitive minutes. So that type of loan balances and kind of forces the team that's loaning them to give them minutes. Because previously what would happen is you would loan a player, you have a coach that is worried about things. He's like, well, I don't trust that young guy, and so I'm going to sit him on the bench.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the worst thing possible for an academy manager that's like, oh God, we just needed this player to get time and he's not. This sucks. That was also another reason why you used to see like really short yank clauses, like, hey, we can recall this player anytime we want to if things aren't going well. But I think we're seeing a little less of that, partly just because the finances are different and because of the exact type of clause you're talking about.
Okay, cool. Well, should we move on to our other business of football story? Because I know this one caught your eye too.
I do, but I think there's a spicy one that we should also talk about. We mentioned and it didn't get on our list.
Okay.
So Kim yesterday had a Jaden Sancho take.
Okay.
And she put in a number that I think caught a lot of eyes for what the likely fee could be for Sancho.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you describe the problem for people like around Jaden Sancho? Like, we know what he kind of was before, but then Manchester United have this big problem. Like, catch everybody up real quick who aren't fans of this. And then we could talk about the issues around selling this player and the issues generally that happen over and over again in the Premier League.
Okay, so obviously coming through, he looked like a pretty incredible all-round winger in Germany. Was a big problem for teams. Obviously was the kind of creative conduit to Haaland, which was pretty profitable for both of them. Goes to Man United for an absolutely colossal fee, 72 mil, around there, big wages, and had a first season which I think was quietly a bit more promising than people noticed, but a whole portion of his game kind of disappeared. Like, there was still some creative passing, there was still some ball carrying, but he didn't look like a guy. Certainly his shots went away, his goal threat went away, and also just watching him, it didn't look like he had the ability to kind of get separation from defenders and get his shots away in the Premier League the way he did in Germany. Then falls out with Ten Hag, barely plays. And now, who really knows what he is? Goes back to Dortmund. And yes, they have a run to the Champions League final. But that part of his game, that goal threat part of his game, is still not there. And it looks like maybe that's gone. So that's an interesting situation.
I think that if we change the context that we look at Sancho as an all-around sort of wide forward, and we look at him as more of a zone mover now, like, you might be able to more accurately describe what you're thinking. So a lot of the zone mover guys are getting the ball further up the pitch. Then they need to move it from the middle third to the final third and push forward. The thing that Sancho always did was he had great creative passing in the box, right? He was able to create great goals for his teammates. That thing still has value, but you've got to actually have legs when you're getting to the box. And if you're the one that's moving the ball, 30, 40 yards forward, you don't necessarily have that. It's harder to do that, especially if you're not on the full attack. So the problem that we have now is you have this young player. He's still pretty young. He's coming into his prime now. We don't fully know how good he is at the elite level. We know he's still good. But you also know that he's got like maybe 300, 400,000 a week in wages.
Yeah.
There's no way that Manchester United are recouping anywhere near their fee. He's got 2 years left on his deal. They're looking at it and saying, all right, what sort of fee can we get back? Kim came out saying that they might get 30 million for him. I think that number is still way high. I think that number is going to be closer to 2 loans, and Manchester United are picking up part of his paycheck. And then his next paycheck is going to be like 200,000 a week, maybe 150,000 a week, like basically average for any biggish team. I think that's the problem here. So I think my guess is like a real transfer doesn't actually happen, even if United want it. If it does happen, it's going to be 20 million or less. And the problem is really the player wages that nobody else in Europe can pick up. Like they pick up half of it at the best.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the context around Sanchez. And I know that's a little spicy, right? Like Jaden Sancho, 72 million fee, unsellable, makes too much wages. Manchester United probably going to eat it at 20 million. And it's not because he's a bad player.
Mm-hmm.
It's just because the economics of the deal do not make sense. And when the economics don't make sense, you can't get anybody else involved. You end up with weird complexity, and you just have to bite your losses so many times. There are going to be more and more of those over the next 3 years until the teams get much smarter about how they structure deals, how they structure wages, and the fees that they're paying.
Yeah, because Kim's 30 mil was based on that's what United are going to want, given that that's the kind of unamortized value remaining from the transfer, right? That's like the bit that they've got left to pay off. But I think once you arrive at the mindset that you're making a loss and you've just got to minimize your loss, then I think things kind of get better for you, or at least more straightforward. And often that's easier, I think, when a new owner comes in, a new manager comes in, you can just kind of say,
yeah,
previous regime problem.
I think United are in a spot where they're most able to clean house because they cleaned house behind the scenes on the football scene side, right? Like we've seen that. They cut a ton of people, partly because they were overstocked there. And now it's a question of how do we clean house on the squad? And it's going to take them 2 or 3 years to get to the point that they have a mostly clean squad, that they're smart. Are they going to get players out of the academy? They're not going to have any problem recruiting coaches. I think the good coaches, especially when they're run reasonably well, will happily go there. But they have to take medicine for another 2 years before they end up being in a spot where they feel like they're smart, and it's easy to move guys and it's easy to bring guys in now.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the thing about Sancho as well is what you've described there. Him having this kind of zone moving role, you can see how that'd be valuable to teams. But I guess the concern is that he doesn't give you any defensive intensity, which you kind of also want from that guy now, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. On the flip side, he was pretty good in the Champions League, and that's the best display in the world, the best sort of shop window. So maybe somebody jumps in, they're happy to take extra risk. I just think the wages are so big that you're going to get a weird fee/wage structure, and the player's never getting up those wages, and he shouldn't.
No,
like the players end up with injury riddled careers, and they take the risk. So take the money too.
On the topic of young players with lots of money, we got time for a little spot of Kylian Mbappe.
Only if you say that like that again.
Kylian Mbappe Lotin. Is that not? Do you remember when he was Mbappe Lotin? I remember that period.
I did.
Okay, so he obviously has got loads of money after moving to Real Madrid, and he's no longer in the French system as well, which might be a part of this too, because an investment company he founded has now bought a controlling stake, or is buying a controlling stake in Caen, who are a Ligue 2 side. And so Mbappe apparently, personally, has invested about 15 million euros of his own money into this, or at least into the investment fund. So we don't quite know. But it's an interesting situation because feasibly, it's not very likely, but feasibly, he could at some point play a team that he part owns.
So this gets restricted on the FA level, but it doesn't get restricted on the FIFA level, which is kind of an interesting one. But the other side is that up until the last decade, maybe there are so few players that can afford to buy football teams that,
Sure.
It wasn't really a risk. LeBron James is never coming over here and having to play Liverpool, different sports, so that's not a problem. But he owns part of that team. Well, I think that, first of all, Kylian, welcome aboard. Ownership is painful, expensive. Unless you're Ryan Reynolds, it doesn't seem to be that much fun. Get used to losing money. That is a thing that happens. I think especially since 2019, we've seen a lot of people that were excited to buy teams that suddenly got stuck. They're like, oh yeah, I'll lose money for a little bit. Then we'll have this magical moment where we found a business model that makes money.
Yeah.
And then the football team will sustain itself. That has not happened in almost any of the histories of the world, outside of, again, Ryan Reynolds, who happens to be magical mystery man that has a wand and he waves at businesses and suddenly they're profitable and beautiful and lovely. Mbappe, though, maybe he's got a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle sponsorship that's coming.
You do kind of wonder, like, does he add value just by like kind of being the owner? Like, I mean, this is something that Como tried to do, right? So actually, like, Cesc Fabregas was a minority shareholder at Como when he was still playing there. Then he was assistant coach. Now he's the coach. Now there are other benefits to being involved with Como as a football club, because Caen, it's in Normandy, it's okay, but it's not Como. But I don't know. I kind of wonder whether Mbappe could do promo for this side and just kind of juice them by himself. Like, who knows?
I think that he can.
Yeah.
I think the flip side of this, though, is the French ultras are hardcore. Like, are they going to get angry at Mbappe if they're bad?
Probably. Like, in fact, definitely. No, knowing France, because the French, look, I love France. Spend a lot of time in France. The French are like a nation of haters. It's been incredibly enjoyable to watch the Olympics, and
I knew where this was going. I'm sorry, people. Don't let me interrupt his
It's
rant,
the best.
But, like, I just like this.
I've been watching the Olympics, and I've just been watching people. Every time anybody overtakes a French person in a race, they get the shit booed out of them for the rest of the race. It's amazing. So yeah, I do think it'll kind of be an issue, because it's not like Mbappe has a link to this place. Mbappe's from the banlieue of Paris. He's from Bondy, I think. He doesn't have a connection to this club, and I don't know. It'll be if it doesn't go well, or if it. And the thing is, you were pointing this out before we started recording. Caen were 6th in Ligue 2 last season, but they weren't 6th because they were one of the superior sides in the league. There's a lot of mush in the middle of that league.
I think the other thing to point out is the recent Bordeaux news, right? So Bordeaux basically folded. They couldn't afford their license, or they couldn't make business sense. Liverpool went to take them over. Bordeaux's a beautiful city. It's a wonderful area of France to be in. They should have a good team. Obviously, it's wine country as well. Like, you could find all sorts of ways, if you commercialize that right, to make a better business out of it. But Liverpool pulled out because they're like, look, we don't even know what the TV deal looks like at the top level. We don't know what sort of checks we're going to have to cut to this in the future as a multi-club ownership. Like, we can't justify being involved in buying a team at all right now. And that's basically, Bordeaux had been trying to be sold for a couple of different years. They never found ownership that could make it make sense. They had earlier ownership that was the classic PE ownership, where it's like, we're not putting any more money into this thing. We bought this thing, we had undervalued assets, we're going to squeeze it. We have seen some of that negative ownership as well. This one was more of a, we like the area, we think it has good potential. They historically have a pretty good academy. Couldn't make it make sense. They folded. We're going to see a lot of teams in France over the next kind of 5 years, especially if they don't get their TV deal sorted, that are available for cheap, despite the fact that they're a great place to produce academy kids. Like, the business of it doesn't make much sense unless you're producing academy kids, which is kind of a different ownership structure than owning a pure football team. So I don't know. It's an uncertainty. I think Mbappe may end up being a potential bit of a hero if he's funding this fairly well, and Caen end up doing fairly well up into the Ligue 1 structure. But I think the uncertainty around that is a pretty big deal. Maybe we'll see more ex-players come through. It reminds me, actually, you remember what Beckham's deal was in MLS?
No, what was it?
So very early on.
It was like he got the right to own his own club, right? As part of it.
That's correct. Okay. He got a huge discounted right to own his own club. And I think he even got to choose the destination. He wanted Miami.
Okay.
Then he couldn't get the stadium done in Miami. Messi's been buying property in Miami for probably a decade, but certainly very aggressively over the previous 5 years, the last couple of years of his Barcelona. This is my understanding anyway. This is things that had been reporting a bit. The connectivity of Messi to going to that area, obviously Miami is the southern hub of all of South America coming into the United States. It's a very multicultural place. It has a really interesting nightlife. Its day life is actually a lot better than it used to be, and the business hub is better than it was. But it was never going to be a great sporting destination And then you get David Beckham's club, where he had the historic MLS deal where he got a very cheap franchise fee. He's like, oh, we're basically going to give you an MLS franchise for free, which is an extra 150 million in value.
Mm-hmm.
Connect that with Messi. Connect that with the Apple deal.
Mm-hmm.
Connect that with the stadium getting done. And you suddenly have one of the most interesting franchises in the US. And it looks like they're going to be the best team in MLS as well, even though it's Messi and friends.
Sure.
They're out there playing 11 aside as a friendly group with a couple of kids that can run, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not that hard for them, apparently. But no, I find that really interesting and fascinating how that worked out. Mbappe now is kind of the heir apparent of the Messi title of best player in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll see if his business endeavors end up paying off as well as being Lionel Messi.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Like how it intersects with the club that already exists. Because, you know, Beckham also could kind of make hay from the fact that, like, even just stuff like they have an eye-catching kit that people want to buy and wear, like things like this. These are kind of edges that maybe Beckham can bring your side. Well, Caen can't just decide that tomorrow they're going to have like a novelty Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles kit because that ties in with Mbappe. You know,
that sounds amazing. By the way, like I think you get a lot of attention. You have to make it look cool. Maybe they cycle through a couple years. Like they've got Leonardo and Michelangelo kits one year, and then they like cycle through the turtles as their away kit. Maybe they have a special extra kit. I don't know. There's like fun stuff that you could do if you have the right creative team behind you. The thing that Beckham brought was like he was so attached to the fashion world, and then he also had business interests that owned like significant portions of his image rights.
Okay,
but because they owned his image rights, they were very interested in keeping him out there in the limelight so they could continue earning money from his image rights. So that's like a very interesting structure. I don't think Mbappe's quite as facially beautiful as David Beckham, but maybe I'm wrong about that. No one. Absolutely no one.
Mats Hummels. Mats Hummels going to Como.
Yeah, I feel like he's more going to be, when Pirates of the Caribbean revives, that's going to be Mats Hummels as the lead. I think that's his future role.
The undead corpse of Pirates of the Caribbean. If we get into that, then we're seriously getting into trouble because I will talk to you about that for 25 minutes. I think that's a pod, Ted. I'm amazed at your stamina, given that you were dying a couple of days ago, and we had to sub it. Fortunately, Ravi looks like he's never been ill a day in his life. He looks like the healthiest man on earth.
I think Ravi, between the running and taking amazing care of himself, I don't think he takes like any sort of substances as well. Like he's a monk that also knows a lot about football.
Perfect.
I'm not. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening, everybody. Appreciate your time. And hopefully we've given you some nuggets to chew on, both about the very interesting transfer roundabouts that are going on right now, and then also some insight into the business that hasn't been available outside of this. If you love us, tell your friends. We grow through people and word of mouth. That's all that we're doing right now. And we've had great growth. Thank you to all the people who are coming back to see Pat on YouTube as well. They much love out there. All right. That wraps us up today. All the best and see you soon.